This is UN Resolution 181, the 1947 plan to split Palestine into two states, one Jewish and one Arab. It was the first time the international community voted on the region's future. To one side, it recognized the Jewish people's right to a sovereign state. To the other, foreign powers carved up a country that was already owned by the Palestinians. Almost nobody arguing about it has actually read the relevant documents. When you do, the first surprise isn't about borders. Before the final vote, the Arab states argued to the UN had no legal authority under its own charter to partition a country against the will of its majority. They motioned the World Court to rule on the legal validity of the plan. That motion was defeated by a single vote, 21 to 20. The partition resolution passed 5 days later, leaving its legal foundation permanently unsettled. This video is a look at the documents themselves, matching the popular narratives against the text and the facts historians actually agree on. By 1947, Britain had ruled Palestine for 30 years under a League of Nations mandate. Decades of escalating conflict between the Arab and Jewish communities over immigration and land ownership had brought the territory to a breaking point. The standard Israeli narrative is straightforward. In November 1947, the UN offered a compromise: 2 states for 2 peoples. The Jewish leadership accepted. The Arab leadership refused. The day after the British withdrew, neighboring Arab states invaded. One side chose compromise. The Arab side chose war, and everything that followed stems from that choice. The standard Arab narrative is different. For centuries, the land was overwhelmingly Arab. Following World War II, a committee of foreign governments handed more than half of it to a minority population, drawing borders through communities that had lived there for generations. In this version, the Arabs didn't reject a fair compromise. They refused to legitimize the partition of their own country. Neither narrative fully captures what was written in the plan itself. The Israeli version overlooks how fair the deal was. The Arab version overlooks if the plan could even be enforced. The core Arab objection was straightforward. They refused to accept being turned overnight into a minority into a Jewish state. The numbers that are in the plan are uncontested. The UN resolution awarded 55% of the land to the Jewish state, at a time when Jews made up roughly 1/3 of the population and legally owned about 7% of the land. Defenders of the resolution argue these percentages are misleading. Most of that 55% was the Negev, a vast, arid desert in the south. The Jewish state wasn't handed the prime asset of the country. It was handed the empty space. The Negev was poor farming land. That part is true, but it was only part of what the Jewish state got. The plan handed it the best farmland in the country, the coastal plain, the valleys, the citrus belt, and left the Arab state, in the UN committee's own words, mountainous regions largely uncultivable. And, even more importantly, the Negev was not empty. Britain's 1946 census counted over 100,000 Bedouin Arabs in the Beersheba district, compared to just 1,000 Jews. The UN calculated that the proposed Jewish state would start with roughly 500,000 Jews and 410,000 Arabs. However, those calculations excluded most of the Bedouin population by classifying them as nomads rather than residents. Include them, and that Jewish majority disappears. The state designated as Jewish would have started off with an Arab majority. The fundamental issue wasn't the amount of land, but rather who would end up governing whom. The second structural flaw was more practical. The proposed map split the country into 6 different interwoven enclaves, 3 for the Jewish state and 3 for the Arab state. Because Palestine had always functioned as a single economic unit, the UN tried to fix this fragmentation by forcing both states into a mandatory shared customs union. During the drafting phase, the UN committee appointed an independent economic expert, a certain Riedman, to assess whether these fractured territories could survive independently. His report was definitive. The Arab state would definitely not be viable without a customs union. Because the Jewish state was allocated the major commercial ports and the industrialized coastal plain, The Arab state was economically compromised from day one. It could only function if the neighbor it was partitioning from agreed to support its economy. When the Israeli side talks about the fair deal that the Arabs rejected, this is the deal that they are referring to. The biggest pro-Palestinian talking point about this plan is that it was imposed by the UN. But imposition requires binding legal authority, and Resolution 181 possessed none. The text itself reveals its legal limitations. The General Assembly recommends the partition plan to the mandatory power, Britain, and requests the Security Council to implement it. Under the UN Charter, the General Assembly holds no legislative power. Its resolutions are explicitly non-binding recommendations. While the newly formed Israeli Provisional Government and the UN Secretary-General later argued the resolution carried binding historical weight, the UN's own legal department formally concluded at the time that the text had no obligatory character whatsoever. It was a blueprint, not a law. That having said though, the United States exerted intense diplomatic and economic pressure on smaller nations to secure the necessary two-thirds majority. Liberia, heavily reliant on American rubber exports, was privately warned by US officials that corporate investments might be frozen if they voted no. The Philippines, who initially denounced the partition plan on the assembly floor as a violation of self-determination, changed their vote to yes after a pseudo-threatening telegram from US officials to their president. The pressure worked. Resolution 181 passed 33-13. But remember that the resolution was just a recommendation that could still be enforced if a major power provides the military power to back it up. But implementing partition against the will of the local majority required an army, and nobody was willing to send one. The resolution requested the UN Security Council to take over administration, but the Council took no action. The small 5-member commission dispatched to Jerusalem to oversee the transition quickly warned the UN that without an international force, the country would descend into open warfare the moment British forces withdrew. Britain was finally broken and military exhausted after World War II, and refused to spend British lives enforcing a plan the Arab side rejected. They refused to manage an orderly handover, announced a hard departure date, and walked away. Meanwhile, the country that had been pressuring other nations to accept the plan had internally decided it would not intervene by force to implement that plan. 11 days before the UN vote, the US State Department drafted a classified memorandum acknowledging that having championed partition, America was morally obliged to help to implement. Yet, its final recommendation was to oppose the use of American troops. Washington calculated that military intervention would alienate the oil-producing Arab world and open a strategic door for Soviet intervention. The Assembly recommended partition, but the nations with the power to enforce it had already quietly decided not to. This leaves the central political act, the Arab leadership's total rejection of the plan. Was that rejection a catastrophic strategic blunder, or was accepting the plan completely impossible? Historian Benny Morris frames it as an historic error. The international community offered the Arab population a recognized state of their own, backed by the legitimacy of the UN vote. By rejecting compromise, gambling on a military solution to block partition, and losing, they walked away with nothing, triggering the massive Palestinian refugee crisis. Historian Rashid Khalidi reads the document through a different lens. The Arab population constituted 2/3 of the country. Accepting partition meant volunteering to become a minority population within a self-defined Jewish state that was explicitly designed to prioritize mass Jewish immigration, meaning the Arab minority would permanently diminish. Khalidi points out that under decades of British rule, the Arab majority had been consistently denied national status, referred to in documents merely as the non-Jewish communities. To him, the partition plan was the culmination of that erasure. This view deserves some pushback. The resolution itself did not erase the Arab population. It explicitly guaranteed an independent Arab state on nearly half the land, and it mandated that the Jewish state included equal, non-discriminatory civil and political rights for its Arab minority within its future constitution. What the plan did demand the Arab majority to give up was not their rights, but their claim to the entire country. The Arab leadership supported a different resolution. The night of the vote, a competing proposal drafted by India, Iran, and Yugoslavia was on the table. A single federal democratic state with autonomous Arab and Jewish regions under a unified constitution. But the partition resolution was called to the floor first, and once it passed, the federal alternative was discarded. We can, and historians have, spent decades debating whether the Arabs should have accepted the plan or not. In the end, the borders of the resolution never mattered. What did matter is that the resolution was the first time that the Jewish state got international recognition. What it did not create was a stable border. Those lines were drawn by the 1948 war. When the fighting paused, the territory under Israeli control grew from the proposed 55% to roughly 78%. The independent Arab state, envisioned by the UN, never came into being. Its remaining fragments were annexed or occupied by Jordan and Egypt. Both sides present simple stories that fall apart when you read the actual document. The 1947 plan was an unfair recommendation that had nobody behind it to enforce it when it passed. If you want more history driven by the source documents rather than the modern commentary, please subscribe.